So to take this discussion further, we're going to be joined via Teams by Nhlanhla Sibisi, Climate and Energy Campaign at Greenpeace Africa. Nhlanhla, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me.
At this point, perhaps you could speak to the importance of observing Arbor Week, planting trees, giving back to the environment, coexisting symbiotically.
Yeah, I guess this is a special occasion in the sense that it's important for us to give special attention to our environment and the role that we can play in safeguarding the environment. And it's good to see that communities that are actually involved in planting trees are taking that into consideration. And it's also an opportunity for us to also protect the already existing trees that we have and try by all means to actually avoid deforestation as we are seeing, because it's also leading towards the climate crisis that we are experiencing. And I'm glad that the professor even gave a little bit of context from your clip in terms of him explaining how the regulation happens with the planting of trees. So this is a very important thing that communities need to do. And I'm also glad to say that environmental organizations throughout the year, these are some of the things that they are actually calling for communities and the government to do.
Well, speaking of climate change, South Africa, as we saw in the past, experienced climate change phenomenons. And given the dynamics, how important is it for everyone to take part positively, giving the environment what it needs to avert the impacts of climate change over the long term?
Yeah, the unfortunate thing we are seeing globally now, and it's not only a local phenomenon, but globally extreme weather events, whether it's droughts, whether it's fires, extreme heats, etc. And that tells us that as a result of the burning of fossil fuels, as also was mentioned by the professor, it does tell us that we're actually exceeding our threshold in terms of how we go about this so-called development. And this gives us an opportunity to actually relook at how we actually generating energy in terms of also looking at how we reduce these extreme weather events. So as governments, as communities, we need to play a role, but also hold the fossil fuel industry accountable for these emissions that we are seeing happening.
At this point, speaking of accountability, let me also bring participation into the mix. How do we contrast initiatives in the urban versus rural communities or rural areas? What more needs to be done in terms of education on that front?
Awareness is very, very, very critical. And we believe as Greenpeace that government can play a much better role in terms of creating this awareness through the Department of Environment, through the Department of Energy, etc. In terms of creating this awareness and letting communities, especially at the local government level, know about the need of actually protecting our biodiversity, but also taking responsibility in the sense that we have good policies that we have promulgated as a country, but unfortunately we're not putting them to good use. And I'll just give you a few examples. If you go to the area of Mpumalanga, Mpumalanga has become the global hotspots, especially when it comes to two types of emissions like NO2 and SO2, and that's a type of pollution that unfortunately impacts human health, and it also impacts the environment in general. So we need to start acting in terms of making sure that companies, industries that are actually polluting are held accountable.
There are challenges that you've alluded to, awareness, even attitudes, misperceptions. And I wonder also for the organizations advocating, for a better or a more sustainable living. What are some of the challenges they're experiencing at this juncture, given the fight against climate change, deforestation, and CO2 emissions?
The unfortunate thing that we have seen is that especially communities that that cannot adapt are the most vulnerable, and unfortunately it's the most vulnerable that actually get impacted because of their lack of or the opportunity to actually adapt. So this is why we see this as an opportunity of actually building on that that awareness, but also trying by all means to make it a point that government plays the role that it should play in terms of holding the fossil fuel companies accountable. And I'm glad to even say that in terms of the scientific reports that we have been generating, we are showing that actually pollution is creating these vulnerabilities that I've just referred to, and we need to act.
Well, given the greenhouse gas emission issues experienced in South African context, what are some of South Africa's biggest contributors at this point? Is South Africa taking the plight of climate change seriously? How do you weigh in on our initiatives?
One thing that we have picked up, for example, last year we looked at our NDC, which is the nationally determined contribution that we have signed up to from the Paris Agreement, and we believe that we are not ambitious enough in terms for us to stay within the 1.5 degrees as detected by science that we should not exceed. If we exceed that, then we'll be exceeding the threshold. So I'd like to believe that from the South African perspective, our contribution that we need to make is to have an NDC that is a little bit more ambitious, that actually meets the 1.5 threshold. And likewise, we also need across the globe to be holding other big polluters to those ambitious targets. So I believe that we need to be far more ambitious than what we are right now to actually reach, because we unfortunately don't have the time, and we're actually spiraling into a crisis that we might not even be able to come back from.
Nhlanhla, just very quickly, Arbor Week obviously commences this week. I wonder what we could do to honor it and to celebrate it. Well, how do we personally take responsibility for our actions?
One of the things that we have been saying of lately is that the political parties need to actually put the environment on their agenda. They need to make it a priority that in whatever work that they're doing, whether they're campaigning or whether they're at the local government level or at the national government level, they actually need to be a little bit more ambitious in terms of protecting the environment. And we as people, through the different initiatives that we have in the country, we're actually doing our bit in terms of planting trees, but also protecting those trees. So we need to ensure that all the different and little efforts that we are putting together, but are also backed up with enforcement, especially from the side of government.
Nhlanhla, Sibisi, thank you for your time with us on the SABC. Nhlanhla is a climate and energy campaigner at Greenpeace Africa, weighing in on how South Africa is faring at this point as we head into Arbor Week. That's usually celebrated the first week of September. Thank you to Nhlanhla for his time with us here on the SABC.